Number 19. Stanton Pierce. In September 2016, the body of a missing 62-year-old man named Luis Martinez was found face down in a burn pile near a cemetery in Antioch, Texas. According to an affidavit, the discovery came after 56-year-old Lori Stone Perry called the Smith County Sheriff's Office and reported witnessing a murder about a week earlier. She claimed that she saw 37-year-old Rebecca Bond shoot Martinez multiple times. Perry admitted to breaking down the rifle, while Bond and a third suspect, 52-year-old Stanton Pierce, disposed of the victim's body. Police arrested Perry and Bond that night. They also captured Pierce after a vehicle and foot chase, followed by a 2-day manhunt. Bond allegedly admitted to shooting Martinez, although authorities have never revealed her motive. She was charged with murder, while Pierce and Perry faced charges for tampering with evidence. Stanton Pierce pleaded guilty to 2 counts of tampering and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. At his sentencing, the judge noticed that he was shaking his head back and forth, and when he was asked why he was doing it, Pierce said, "I never wanted this to happen. I'm just ashamed." He also mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," toward news cameras while being led out of the courtroom. Rebecca Bond took a plea deal and was sentenced to 50 years for murder, while Lori Perry received a 15-year sentence for tampering or fabricating physical evidence with intent to impair a human corpse. Number 18. People smugglers near the border. In late February 2023, a Zavala County deputy discovered a woman and child in the trunk of a car during a traffic stop. The driver was arrested on a smuggling charge, and the people in the trunk were turned over to Border Patrol. Zavala County is near the Mexican border, so it's nothing new for authorities to catch people transporting undocumented immigrants. Just 2 months after the car trunk incident, in April 2023, a truck pulling a horse trailer led deputies on an early morning chase after refusing to pull over for a traffic stop. When the truck finally pulled over, people began running from the horse trailer, and in the end, 25 undocumented migrants were detained. While helping people escape dire situations in hopes of pursuing a better life is an honorable cause, people smuggling is exploitative, dangerous, and sometimes deadly, especially for the migrants themselves. And for the smugglers, this means facing more serious criminal charges and consequences than someone who's caught with migrants who aren't suffering or dying. In September 2022, Zavala County deputies found 2 men sweating profusely and having difficulty breathing in the trunk of a car, and it was discovered after the fact that they were suffering from heat exhaustion. The driver and passengers of the vehicle were charged with felony smuggling of persons in the likelihood of causing serious bodily injury or death. These types of crimes also jeopardize the safety of both the public and law enforcement. In April 2023, a Texas Department of Public Safety trooper chased after a driver who refused to pull over for a traffic violation. The pursuit reached dangerously high speeds of up to 120 miles per hour before another officer attempted to lay a trap to deflate the suspect's tires. Footage showed the vehicle barreling straight toward the officer in an apparent attempt to run him over, but luckily he moved out of the way just in time to narrowly avoid being mowed down. In 2021, a famous TikToker lost his life during a police chase while transporting 3 undocumented migrants in Zavala County. After losing control of his car and running off the road, 19-year-old Gabriel Salazar overcorrected, causing his Chevy Camaro to veer off the other side of the road before hitting some trees, rolling over and bursting into flames. And sadly, everyone inside the vehicle lost their lives. Unfortunately, people smuggling is as popular as ever, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. But for now, authorities are doing what they can about it. Number 17. San Antonio stolen shark. During the summer of 2018, a San Antonio aquarium visitor stole a gray horn shark that was 16 inches long, named Miss Helen. The male suspect was initially accompanied by another man and a woman as he wrapped the creature in a blanket, put her in a bucket of water, and then placed the bucket in a baby stroller. Staff members followed the thief into the parking lot and asked to search his vehicle, but he said that his child was sick and that he urgently needed to leave. When police received a call about a stolen shark, They initially thought they were being pranked, but they realized it was serious when they saw surveillance footage of Miss Helen's kidnapping. Investigators caught up with the suspects the next day after tracing the getaway vehicle's license plate, and after realizing they were caught, the trio confessed to the crime. When officers went to retrieve Helen from the home of the mastermind behind the crime, 38-year-old Anthony Shannon, they discovered that he was quite the marine enthusiast. His house was filled with numerous tanks containing exotic fish and other marine species, and he appeared very knowledgeable about the animals he kept. Until that point, authorities and aquarium staff members were positive that Helen hadn't survived her abduction, but much to everyone's relief, she was found in good health. Shannon initially tried to show law enforcement a fake receipt for the purchase of Miss Helen, but the police were quick to notice that the receipt had been doctored. Shannon eventually admitted to the theft and reportedly said that he stole Helen because he was trying to replace one of his sharks that had passed away. Thankfully, though, Helen was returned to the aquarium safe and sound. Shannon was charged with felony theft in the shark stealing case. And around the same time, he was accused of shoplifting $250 worth of pots and pans from a home goods store. He also had several theft convictions on his rap sheet, making it evident that he was no stranger to stealing. Number 16. William Anthony Hall. When 69-year-old William Anthony Hall noticed a vehicle with no handicapped tag parked in a handicapped spot outside a post office in Houston one evening in 2017, he felt compelled to take the law into his own hands. So he confronted the vehicle's owner, 67-year-old James Garza, a local attorney who was there to pick up mail from his P.O. box. Nobody knows exactly what happened in the moments leading up to Hall's decision to pull a gun and fire a single fatal bullet into Garza's chest. Hall claimed that Garza got physical with him and that he feared for his life. But that couldn't have been true, according to prosecutors, who argued that a bullet hole in Garza's mail proved that he was holding it rather than pushing Hall around when he got shot. People often think of Texas as a free-for-all when it comes to the use of guns, but this isn't the case, according to Assistant District Attorney Mary McFadden, who used the case as an opportunity to make it clear that a license to carry a gun isn't a license to kill. And she at least got her point across in court, because Hall was convicted of murder and received a 20-year prison sentence for the crime. Number 15. Stanley Saliga. Most people visit strip clubs for a good time with no strings attached, but every now and then customers develop unhealthy feelings for dancers. It happened to a 22-year-old dancer from Fort Worth named Abigail Abby Saldana in 2021 when she began to fear that a regular customer at her workplace was stalking her. Then, just a few months later, she was killed. On the night of October 26th, Saldana was found murdered in her bullet-riddled car within view of her place of employment, Rick's Cabaret. Investigators quickly learned that she'd complained to her family, friends, and colleagues about an obsessed customer named Stan harassing her. Identified as 54-year-old Stanley Saliga, the alleged stalker claimed in several Instagram posts that he and Saldana had been enjoying each other's company since July of 2021. He said that he saw a future with the young woman and that he paid her thousands of dollars over the course of their interactions, only to be lied to and taken advantage of. Saliga also accused Saldana of being involved in a high-end prostitution ring. About 2 weeks before her murder, Saldana had found a tracking device on her car, and as the harassment continued, she told her friends and family that she was scared. According to investigators, a license plate reader picked up Saliga's truck passing through an intersection just seconds after Saldana's car, and just 17 minutes later, Saldana was killed. Additional surveillance footage allegedly shows Saliga's truck repeatedly driving past Saldana's apartment before the murder. Saliga initially agreed to meet with the police at a certain time to discuss the case, but he never showed after he called and claimed that a family member had died. And when a SWAT team showed up at his door at 11:30 p.m., he refused to exit his home. He was eventually apprehended with a self-inflicted wound to his neck that required medical treatment. And based on the available records, Saliga remains in custody without bond amid the ongoing case. Number 14. Charles Bryant. A 24-year-old college student named Jackie Vandergriff was found brutally murdered at a park in the town of Grapevine in September 2016. And surveillance footage from local bars showed a man named Charles Bryant striking up a conversation with Jackie just hours before her death. At the beginning of the investigation, detectives crossed paths with Bryant's recent ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Caitlin Mathis. She later told 48 Hours that within weeks of dating Bryant, she began to see red flags. Mathis described her ex's behavior as manipulative and narcissistic, and she said that when she ended the relationship just weeks before Vandergriff's death, Bryant refused to accept that it was over. He was arrested 3 times for showing up at the young woman's college, and she ultimately filed for a restraining order against him. On the day Vandergriff's body was found, Bryant contacted Mathis in violation of the restraining order. This was actually what landed him at the police station in the first place, giving authorities the opportunity to question him in connection with Vandergriff's murder. Bryant initially claimed to have no memory of the night Vandergriff died, and he insisted that he didn't even know who she was. But he eventually gave a detailed account of the crime, including details only the killer would know. During a search of the suspect's home, police recovered the large military-style knife that he had used to stab Vandergriff to death. They also found a receipt from 4:43 a.m., just 2 hours before the victim's body was found, and were able to connect it with surveillance footage of Bryant buying a shovel and cold medicine. A trash bin outside the suspect's home contained a satchel with Texas Woman's University printed on it. It was Vandergriff's college, and the bag matched one that she was seen carrying on her last night alive. Plastic zip ties with blonde hair in them were also found in the garbage can, and DNA testing confirmed that the hair belonged to the victim. Inside Bryant's vehicle, police found a cell phone battery that they believed belonged to Vandergriff, as well as a stun gun with her DNA on it. And between the suspect's confession and the physical evidence, it was enough to charge the suspect with murder. Investigators theorized that Bryant took his anger over his ex-girlfriend's rejection out on Vandergriff. His defense attorney argued that Vandergriff died of accidental asphyxiation during consensual intimacy, and that his client panicked and tried to dispose of her body because he was afraid of getting in trouble. But in the end, Bryant was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Number 13, William George Davis. Staff members at a hospital in Tyler, Texas, were baffled when patients began experiencing mysterious complications while recovering from heart surgery in 2017. It happened to at least 11 people over a 7-month period, leaving 6 of them dead. The patients were all in stable condition and were expected to recover when their conditions suddenly worsened. Doctors finally realized what was going on when they looked at CT scans that showed air in the victims' brains. The most likely explanation for how it happened was by someone deliberately injecting oxygen into the patient's venous systems or their arterial lines. Surveillance footage showed a nurse named Will Davis exiting rooms just minutes before the complications began, and in one incident, he stood at his station doing nothing while an alarm went off in a room of a patient he'd just treated. A search of his computer later revealed that he'd researched the effects of injecting air into a patient's line well in advance of his crimes. Davis was charged with capital murder in early 2018. However, his lawyer argued that his client was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that the evidence didn't necessarily point to foul play. A small piece of the truth finally came out, though, in a jailhouse phone call Davis made to his ex-wife after he was convicted of the charges. His ex wanted the truth, and he said that he may have prolonged patients' illnesses so he'd continue getting enough overtime to pay the bills. Prosecutors rejected the explanation and stuck to their belief that Davis was a cold, calculating sociopath who killed for fun, which is probably the case. But it was the first time he admitted to any wrongdoing whatsoever. As of now, he's appealing his case from death row. Number 12, baby born at ChickfilA. Fallon and Robert Griffin were on their way to San Antonio's University Hospital to have a baby in July of 2018 when the 38 weeks pregnant mother-to-be found herself with an urgent need to relieve her bladder. It simply couldn't wait, and the employees at a Chick-fil-A were kind enough to let Fallon use their restroom while they closed up the restaurant for the night. But what was meant to be a quick pit stop suddenly became a medical emergency. The couple's baby girl, Gracelyn, was ready to be born, and she wasn't going to wait wait long enough for the Griffins to get to the hospital. Robert coached his wife as she gave birth on the bathroom floor while an employee named Brenda Enriquez called 911. Enriquez stayed on the line with the dispatcher to answer questions and take advice on how to handle the situation. But by the time paramedics arrived, Gracelyn had already entered the world. She was born with her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck twice, but thanks to her dad, it was quickly removed and she was perfectly healthy. In a Facebook post that quickly caught the attention of news outlets across the country, Robert described how Chick-fil-A employees brought warm towels into the bathroom to keep the baby warm while they waited for an ambulance. And during an interview with local station KENS, the couple revealed that the restaurant had gifted baby Gracelyn with free food for life. Number 11. Billy Sherman. Nobody knows how many elderly women Billy Sherman has murdered, but as of 2023, he's been formally accused of killing 22 victims in northern Texas, and he's been convicted in 2 cases. It's also unclear when Sherman killed his first victim, but he flew under the radar for years. The accused serial killer was caught in 2018 after a woman survived an attack. Someone had also recently filed a suspicious person complaint in the area in reference to Sherman. Police soon zeroed in on him as the prime suspect in a series of murders that had recently occurred in the area and set up a sting at his apartment in Dallas. While performing surveillance on Sherman shortly before his arrest, investigators saw him throwing a jewelry box into a dumpster, and it was labeled with the name Lou Ty Harris. And when officers went to the woman's home, they found her dead. At this point, the investigation into the possible extent of Sherman's past crimes was just beginning. Detectives began reviewing past cases involving the deaths of elderly women and missing jewelry and compared them to Sherman's phone records. Altogether, they connected him in 24 possible murders, and as a result, he was charged with 22 counts. According to police, in many cases, Sherman went door to door posing as a maintenance worker. He also followed victims home from Walmart and forced his way into their houses. The deaths were repeatedly attributed to natural age-related causes, enabling him to continue killing undetected for far longer than most murderers get away with. Authorities claim that Sherman sold the ill-gotten valuables he stole from his victims within hours of acquiring them. He peddled the items online and in pawn shops, and they were lost forever to the surviving family members who often valued the pieces more for sentimental reasons than their monetary value. In the end, Sherman was convicted of murdering Lou Ty Harris and another victim named Mary Brooks. After securing 2 life convictions, which will hopefully ensure that Sherman will remain behind bars even if he successfully appeals one of the cases, prosecutors dropped the 20 remaining murder counts. Victims' families were extremely upset by the decision, understandably so, and continue to advocate for legal changes that they believe will better protect elderly people living in Texas. Number 10. The Mummy Marauder. Employees at a First Convenience Bank branch in Harris County, Texas, experienced an especially hair-raising Friday the 13th in September 2019. Around 11:30 a.m. on what began as a normal day, a man wearing white gauze around his face and hand, along with a wig, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, entered the bank. He threatened a teller and demanded cash before fleeing the scene in a Mitsubishi Montero SUV. Authorities were thankful that nobody was hurt during the robbery, but they were determined to catch the man that had terrorized innocent people who were just going about their day. The FBI offered a $5,000 reward in exchange for information leading to the culprit's identification and arrest. Agency spokesman Connor Hagan told Fox News that they hoped to wrap the case up quickly. Unfortunately, though, there have been no updates on the case since it first hit the news, suggesting that the robber is still at large. Number 9. Monkeypox patient brings virus to US. In 2021, a middle-aged man who'd recently returned to Dallas from Nigeria was diagnosed with monkeypox, making him the first case in the US since 2003. At a time when the world was still in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, the last thing anyone wanted to deal with was another outbreak of disease. So naturally, the news caused panic. By the time the patient went to the hospital, he'd been experiencing symptoms including fever, cough, and fatigue for 2 weeks. He also had a rash on his face, prompting staff to put him in an airborne isolation room, where extra precautions were taken to prevent the spread of pathogens. Luckily, monkeypox doesn't spread nearly as easily as COVID, and because masks were required in airports and on flights, the risk of spreading was low. But to be safe, the CDC monitored the situation and kept tabs on anyone who traveled on the same flight as the patient or had recently had contact with him. And in total, the agency kept an eye on 223 people for about a month and a half. Thankfully, though, no secondary cases were identified. According to CNN, monkeypox is related to smallpox, but it's less transmissible and less deadly. It spreads through infected bodily fluids and respiratory droplets. Initial symptoms include swollen lymph nodes, fever, headache, nausea, exhaustion, and muscle aches, with patients eventually developing the telltale rash that inspired the disease's name. But if treated, the illness only lasts for 2 to 4 weeks. Monkeypox reappeared in Texas several months after the July 2021 case, when another traveler tested positive for the virus. Then, throughout 2022, the number of cases increased. And in August of that same year, the first ever monkeypox-related death in the US happened in Harris County. Number 8. Oscar Rosales. Just after midnight on January 23, 2022, 47-year-old Harris County Constable Charles Galloway activated the lights on his patrol vehicle in an attempt to pull over a Toyota Avalon. Once the car in question pulled over, Galloway radioed dispatch to inform them of the traffic stop. But he never got a chance to question the driver, who got out of his vehicle and approached the patrol car with a rifle in hand. The suspect shot at Galloway multiple times before getting into his vehicle and driving away, leaving Galloway to die at the scene. And it was later determined that he'd been killed by a single gunshot to the head. According to court documents, the car's plates came back to a 40-year-old woman named Reina Azucena Pereira Marquez. She told investigators that her common-law husband of 17 years, 50-year-old Oscar Rosales, had told her he was going hunting or shooting with friends before he took her car that night, leaving his own vehicle in the driveway. When police found the car, a man later identified as Reina Marquez's brother, Henri Mauricio Pereira Marquez, was seen wiping down the door handles of the vehicle. Rosales, however, was nowhere to be found. Authorities charged Reina Marquez and Henri Marquez with tampering with evidence while the manhunt for Rosales continued. A few days after the murder, Mexican authorities apprehended a fugitive across the border from Del Rio in Ciudad Acuña. He was extradited back to Texas, though, where he faces a capital murder charge. 2 additional suspects were also arrested for hindering apprehension. At the time of his arrest, Rosales was wanted in Texas on an aggravated assault charge from 1996, and he was also wanted in El Salvador for murder. He was in the United States illegally at the time of Galloway's murder, and based on his prior allegations of violence and the nature of his most recent alleged crime, District Attorney Kim Ogg said that the death penalty may be on the table. Number 7. Antoine Daniel Baden. 24-year-old Calogero Duenas and his wife Amber Aresti planned to spend New Year's Eve in 2021 celebrating their daughter's birthday at a Chuck E. Cheese in Humble, Texas. Amber was already inside the building when Calogero rushed in and yelled that he'd been shot. Then just seconds later, he collapsed and died from his injuries. Surveillance footage revealed that Calogero had gotten into an altercation with a man who drove the wrong way in the parking lot and almost hit him, and shortly after the two were seen exchanging words before a gunshot was heard. The suspect, 27-year-old Antoine Daniel Baden, remained at large for several days and was accused of committing several other crimes before his arrest. 2 days after Calogero's murder, he allegedly shot one man and shot at another outside a supermarket. And 3 days after that, he was arrested for assaulting one of his own family members. When shown surveillance footage of his alleged crimes, Baden denied that it was him in the video, but authorities believe otherwise, and he was booked on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, assault of a family household member with a previous conviction, and murder. He's currently being held at the Harris County Jail while his cases proceed through the court system. Amber Aresti told local station KTRK that she could still hear her husband's screams in the back of her head and that his murder had left their 2 children heartbroken. She said she was relieved that Calogero's alleged killer was identified and locked up, and that she hoped Baden wasn't released while his case proceeded in court. Number 6. James Manning. A Dallas family was terrorized by sudden violence in 2020 when the father of the household shot his wife and kids in cold blood. According to an affidavit, 57-year-old James Manning, who's also listed as James Webb in some documents, began arguing with his wife, 35-year-old Victoria Bunton, at around 10 a.m. He had a headache that morning and said that the couple's teenage sons, Zyquan and Isaac, were being too loud. And while the details of how the situation escalated are unclear, Manning allegedly pulled a gun at some point and shot Victoria at least twice before turning the gun on his children. He waited about an hour before he contacted the police using an emergency medical alert device. And during the conversation, he told the dispatcher what he'd done. When police arrived at the scene, Manning allegedly told them that he got sick of his family members yelling and telling him that nothing was wrong with him, so he shot them. And as a result, he was charged with capital murder. Victoria's sister, Barbara McGee, told CBS News that the family never saw Manning's behavior as threatening, and as far as they knew, he'd never harmed Victoria or their sons in the past. But they did find him to be strange. He seemed distant and often stayed in the car instead of coming inside during visits, despite Barbara's attempts to welcome him into her home. In other words, it was as if he wanted nothing to do with his wife's family. And according to the most recent updates on the case, Manning's bond was set at $3 million. Number 5. Kevin Acorto. 33-year-old Janae Gagnier, known to her 3 million followers as Mercedes Moore, was both a dancer and a model. She eventually became popular enough on social media to make a living entirely from paid partnerships with sponsors. Mercedes was recognized pretty much everywhere she went throughout the Houston area, and she was often seen partying with celebrities. As an influencer, she never went long without checking her phone, which is why her family became worried when she went radio silent in August of 2021. And after waiting to hear from her with no luck, her father, Mark Gagnier, went to her apartment to check on her. But when Mercedes didn't answer the door, he kicked it in. What he saw next could perhaps be described as a parent's worst nightmare. He found Mercedes lying dead at the bottom of her staircase. Mark initially thought that she had had a terrible accident, but when he entered his daughter's bedroom, he found a man clinging to life with a knife stuck in his neck. Later identified as 34-year-old Kevin Alexander Acorto, he soon succumbed to his injuries. Bizarre messages scrawled across Mercedes' wall with pink lipstick offered some of the only clues about the circumstances leading up to her murder. One of the ramblings stated, "Janae led me to think she cared about me but wore another man's ring," while another said, "I was used for money." An autopsy concluded that the victim died from strangulation and a traumatic concussion. But surprisingly, investigators found no evidence that her connection with Acorto extended beyond social media. Mark later told local station KTRK that he'd warned his daughter repeatedly about the dangers of social media. He also feared that a crazy person might become obsessed with his daughter and stalk or harm her. And unfortunately, his worst fears came true. Number 4. Thomas Hicks. In April 2021, emergency responders worked their way through a massive swarm of bees while entering the Breckenridge home of 70-year-old Thomas Hicks and his wife, Zonnie. Hicks had been aggressively attacked and went into cardiac arrest. Zonnie later told Big Country homepage that Thomas was about to mow the lawn while she went grocery shopping, and before leaving the house, she reminded her husband not to go into a certain corner of the yard where they'd observed a lot of bee activity. But when she returned home, she found Thomas jumping and screaming amid a swarm of bees. Apparently, he was so covered in the tiny insects that Zonnie couldn't see his head or back. As she watched her husband collapse to the ground, Zonnie frantically dialed 911. Paramedics worked on Thomas for an hour before concluding that there was nothing they could do to save him, and sadly he was pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, a firefighter removed his own protective gear and put it on Zonnie, who survived the attack and was rushed to the hospital. Local beekeeper Joey Venekamp removed the hive from a hollowed-out tree behind the family's shed. He estimated that it was about 2 years old and therefore a well-established hive. At the time, there was an ongoing battle for the queen of the hive, making the bees highly aggressive and therefore more prone to attack. Venekamp told Big Country homepage that when a bee stings someone, it emits a pheromone warning other bees of the perceived threat. He also said that the best thing to do in a situation like that is take cover. Number 3. Quanmain Boyd. 25-year-old Kavana Smith was 4.5 months pregnant when she was shot dead in the middle of a Houston street during the early morning hours in October of 2021. A witness told police that he saw a couple arguing as he walked to his vehicle to leave for work. He then described watching a man shoot Kavana before fleeing the scene in a white pickup truck. Another witness claimed that as he drove by the arguing couple shortly before the shooting, Kavana hit the back of his vehicle to get his attention and asked him to call the cops. And when the driver noticed the suspect holding a gun, he decided not to stop. There was also a woman living nearby who was already on the line with 911 when she watched the shooting happen. Authorities quickly zeroed in on 25-year-old Quanmain Boyd as their prime suspect. According to Kavana's family members, she'd just confirmed her pregnancy the day before the murder. Boyd, who already had 4 children and was unemployed, was allegedly upset by the news because he didn't want any more kids. And shortly before she was killed, Kavana texted her location to a friend and said she was at Boyd's apartment trying to get some money he owed her. She said she was sharing her location in case anything happened to her. Then, a few minutes later, Kavana messaged the same friend saying that she'd been abducted. She identified Boyd as her kidnapper and said he didn't want to give her the money she'd come for. The friend told her that she'd come get her, but that's when Kavana stopped responding, and by then it was too late. While searching Boyd's home, police found a card announcing her pregnancy and containing an ultrasound image. She was clearly excited about it, making the situation even more tragic. In the end, authorities charged Boyd with capital murder, but the killer's case appears to be ongoing. Number 2. Alexander Nathan Barta. In 2018, a 21-year-old Joaquin, Texas man named Alexander Nathan Barta posted an ad on the dark web in search of a willing victim to fulfill his desire to experience cannibalism and necrophilia. He also wrote that he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. The disturbing post caught the attention of a federal undercover officer who responded pretending to be a single father from Florida. And over a 10-day period, the parties exchanged messages regarding Barta's desire to assault, kill, and eat the agent's teenager. Barta showed up at a designated meeting spot with a knife, trash bag, cell phone, and tablet, and by all appearances he planned to follow through with his horrific fantasy. Thankfully though, instead of meeting with an unsuspecting victim, he was nabbed by law enforcement. He was hit with a slew of federal charges, but ended up taking a plea deal and admitting to 2 child exploitation charges in exchange for 2 20-year sentences. The defense urged the judge to impose the sentences concurrently, while the prosecution called for the sentences to run consecutively. Much to the relief of anyone who believed Barta needed to be locked up for as long as possible, the judge imposed the sentences consecutively, which amounts to a total of 40 years behind bars, followed by lifetime supervision. Special Agent in Charge Mark Dawson described the case as one of the most morally depraved and appalling criminal conspiracies he'd seen in 23 years of working in law enforcement. And following Barta's sentencing, U.S. Attorney Stephen J. Cox cited the case as a chilling reminder of how online talk is not always just talk. Number 1. Terry Turner. Adil Degui was likely lost when he pulled into the driveway of a stranger's home in Martindale, Texas, late at night in early 2022. But the man who lived at the residence, 65-year-old Terry Turner, apparently didn't think about this when he marched outside with his gun. According to police, Adil was frantically trying to back out of the driveway when Terry approached the car and shot him through the driver's side window, ultimately killing the man. Terry then went back into his house and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that he'd just killed a guy who tried to shoot him first. Responding officers didn't find the gun in Adil's car, and they weren't convinced that the shooting was a true case of self-defense. So authorities charged Terry with murder, giving Adil's family hope that justice would be served. But now they're not so sure. More than 2 years later, the case still hasn't gone to trial, and Terry remains free on bond, leaving the victim's loved ones feeling increasingly convinced that he'll never be held accountable for Adil's death. The victim's family told local station KXAN that they've lost faith in the American justice system. Caldwell County District Attorney Fred Weber said that it's normal for murder cases to take 2 to 3 years to process through the court system. He further explained that this is often the case even in the absence of a COVID-related backlog of cases. Weber told KXAN that his office had been keeping Adil's family up to date on the progress of the case and that he hoped to get it in front of a jury as soon as possible. But as things currently stand, the case is slated to go to trial sometime in the fall of 2023. If you were to move to Texas, would you rather live in one of the state's major cities like Houston or Dallas, or a sprawling rural area with very few people and lots of privacy? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.